All right, we're in Matthew chapter 25. We're looking at this parable of the 10 virgins yesterday. We talked about how weddings were back then, so we could have some chance of understanding this, because all of the customs and everything, they sound way different than how we do weddings now. So we worked through that. If you didn't catch yesterday, you might want to go catch yesterday, because a lot of these stranger cultural details will be pretty foreign unless you caught that one. But what does this parable actually boil down to now that we have the parts in place to play with to get what's going on? Well, I think it's all right here, front-loaded on the front end of the thing. Matthew chapter 25 comes after Matthew chapter 24 because of how math is. And the ideas, unlike some chapter breaks in the Bible, the ideas flow directly from 24 into 25. There's no observable break between the flow of thought and all the red letters and all the stuff that Jesus is saying in chapter 24 going into 25. So we can assume that the first line of Matthew chapter 25 is a straight-up continuation of the previous thought, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Jesus says, "At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 of them were wise." And what we figure out pretty quickly is that the foolishness or wisdom of these bridesmaids is demonstrated in how much allowance they grant for how long the whole wedding business and the paperwork and everything else that goes into it might take. Some of them, 5, look at the situation. They're like, you know what? I'm just going to bet that this is pretty quick. And if I'm wrong, sure, I'm going to look like a complete idiot and I might not even get to go to the actual party and I will have failed in my bridesmaidly duties. But whatevsies, I'm pretty positive I'm reading the situation right. I don't need to prepare for the long haul. The other 5 are like, I don't know, these things can it can take a minute, so we're just going to ration carefully. We're going to bring some extra bonus oil just in case things get real weird. And that way there'll be no chance of us missing out, because if we burn all of that midnight oil that we have, like, the sun will come up the next morning. If it takes that long, I mean, it'd be crazy, but now there'll be plenty of light. They won't need our dumb lamps anyway. So we are prepared for anything. But right on the front end here, we got a couple of callbacks that I think deserve to be explored. Number 1, it says, "At that time." And then number 2, it says, "The kingdom of heaven will be like." All right, so at that time. Well, I don't know what is at that time. What are we even talking about here? Huge book with lots of pages, fine print. What the heck is going on? Oh, yeah. Matthew 24 is about all of that stuff about the end of time and how things are going to work out. And Jesus' answer to the question the disciples ask at the front end about when will all this happen and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age, his answer spans a few different moments in time. So you'll recall they ask him that question, and then in the first part of Matthew 24, Jesus is like, a whole bunch of stuff is going to happen. That's the world kingdoming. So I think it is pretty safe to say that at the beginning of chapter 25 now, back to where we're at right now, when he says, "At that time," he is not referring to what he's talking about at the beginning of Matthew chapter 24, when he's talking about like nations rising against each other and there being wars and rumors of wars, and you might get handed over to death and bad things are going to happen. Some people are going to fall away. No, it doesn't seem like he's referring to that time, because then in Matthew 24, he moves on to times after that, because the second part of Jesus' answer is right here where he's like, oh, it's like in the prophet Daniel, there's going to be an abomination that causes desolation. Everybody would understand this to mean some kind of profaning of the temple, and there's going to be this time of great suffering. So that's a distinct time from the first block of time he's talking about. But look back over at chapter 25, and Jesus saying, "At that time," at the beginning of this 10 virgins parable we're looking at now. And I'm like, no, I don't think he's talking about this abomination of desolation, Daniel suffering time either. And some people are going to be like, there's a Messiah over there. Jesus says that in 24, but that doesn't correspond. It just doesn't seem natural. And so if Jesus' phrase "at that time" at the beginning of chapter 25 in the parable of the 10 virgins or 10 bridesmaids doesn't correspond with any of that stuff about the run-up to the end of the age and the return of the Son of Man, then it's only safe to conclude that "at that time" at the beginning of Matthew chapter 25 is referring to like the time, the big thing that it's all about, which is the return of the Son of Man, verse 30 of Matthew 24 says, "Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and all the people in the earth will mourn, and they'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." And like, okay, that's a pretty big deal. That's unmissable. That's kind of the moment, the culminating thing. That's the thing that, pow, you wouldn't totally see it coming, but you were supposed to be ready and attentive. And some people are going to be ready and they're going to catch it, and some people aren't. And it's like a fig tree. Some people are going to look at that fig tree and be like, look, it's getting all springy. It's all flexible. That means spring is going to spring any second here. It's about to happen. And implicitly, by contrast, the dullard is just not even going to look at the little twigs of the fig tree. And they're going to be like, I don't care about figs. I don't care about any of this stupid spring stuff. I don't care. I'm not eyes up. I'm not paying attention. And then Jesus says the key verse of Matthew 24, which is, "Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come." And then he references all of that stuff about things in the time of Noah, and they were having parties and getting married. And, oh, that might connect. I just thinking of that one. Okay, we're going to have to come back to the getting married thing. And people getting left in a field. And then you get the parable at the end of chapter 24 about the attentive servant who's like, hey, my master might come back at any time, and I got to be ready doing the things my master would want me to be doing. And then you got the lousy servant that's like, I don't know. I don't care. I don't really think about when the master's going to come back. And so I'm going to get hammered and punch the servants a little bit. And in the end, of course, the one who was attentive to the return of the master is the one who is right. And then the very next phrase is, "At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like." So clearly the parable of the 10 virgins, the 10 bridesmaids, I think without any argument, we can agree this is not talking about the run-up to the end of the age. This is talking about the return of the Son of Man, the big culminating event that everything about chapter 24 was pointing toward. This is in keeping with Jesus' instruction to be attentive. Therefore, once again, keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. Well, I mean, that's the same punchline as the parable of the 10 virgins or the 10 bridesmaids, right? Like, keep watch, because you don't know when the wedding party is going to get ready to leave the bride's house and do its lit up evening nighttime procession over to the groom's house, where they set up shop and become a family, and the festivities will carry on. So that, I think, gives us a pretty clear sense of what the timeline is here. And maybe some of you are like, why are we spending so much time on this? It's super obvious. Well, I don't know. People do weird things with these passages. You just got to understand that this is a complex part of Bible and theology. And because of that, people got systems, and the systems all have to fit together. And so some of these little details that seem really obvious if you're just kind of doing a clean read on it for the first time can escape the incredibly learned and well-versed in this stuff, because it doesn't fit with the rest of the system that's been built out of all of the other passages. And so then a phrase like that, they just don't even notice it. I don't think anybody's lying or being dishonest. You just don't notice something like that. So again, I think it's safe to say we have the timeline established. So I'm going to go with the paraphrase here. I think it's accurate. Another way to put this would be, so at the time, and it's like right now, the Son of Man is exactly right now, just seconds from returning. This is all unfolding and happening. The kingdom of heaven will be like. Well, now there's that language again, and that phrase summons a whole bunch of things to mind, like, say, Matthew chapter 13. You remember back in Matthew chapter 13, it's a whole bunch of parables. I think we called it the Kingdom Parables Discourse. A lot of these parables start with or include language about the kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed which a man took and planted. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while everybody was sleeping, his enemy came. The kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. These turns of phrases, these literary details, they're there for a reason. This is being used with enormous intentionality. And so the fact that here 12 chapters later at the beginning of chapter 25, we're coming back to the kingdom of heaven is like, well, I think it's meant to do two things. One, we've already talked about. It's meant to connect the dots between the kingdom values of the Sermon on the Mount way back at the beginning. And this is the stuff the world is into, but God is into this very different stuff. This is an upside-down kingdom with upside-down values and upside-down currency, and it's better. It's what you want. People hear Jesus say that in the Sermon on the Mount, and they get really interested, and they follow him around, and he does miracles, and then they're like, wait, but if you're doing all these miracles, why are there still religious people who are mad at you And why hasn't everybody signed up? How is this going to unfold over time? And Matthew 13 is kind of the first acknowledgement that there will be an unfolding over time. Maybe there are hints of that in Matthew 10 as well that we should acknowledge. But in Matthew 13, it's like, this is going to take a while. This is going to grow up in ways you don't expect. There's going to be some mess and ugly that goes along with it. Don't worry, the field might look untended, but it's tended. God's going to sort that stuff out later. You don't have to, as my servants, Jesus is saying. And then in Matthew 24, the disciples are effectively asking, like, hey, just how long is this kingdom time frame? How is this going to unfold? Where is this all headed? So I think the fact that we're using this kingdom descriptive language in Matthew 5, in Matthew 10, in Matthew 13, in chapter 24, and now distinctively following the same structure, the same pattern of all the kingdom parables here in 25, what Jesus is implicitly saying here is that a kingdom understanding of you and reality and existence includes the values of the kingdom. It includes action for the kingdom. It includes the community of the kingdom and this slow unfolding narrative of time with the kingdom. But it is also a kingdom value to understand that there is an end to this era. There is an end to history as we understand it, and that it is a kingdom value to be eyes up in anticipation of what's coming, to be ready, to use a kingdom citizen's resources even in a way that is shrewd and paced, taking into account that this is going somewhere, but that we don't get the exact timeline of how it's supposed to unfold. And on that note, I just want to say congratulations. We made it through half a verse of the Bible together today. I think this was time very well spent. If the breeze happens to be in our favor tomorrow, the sails will fill and maybe we'll even get a whole other half verse done then. Hey, I wanted to real quick say thank you to the handful of people who I just saw drop off of supporting the podcast at patreon.com/TMBH podcast. And I just never want that to be weird between us. I am so grateful for the time that you've spent hanging out with me here. Hopefully you're not going anywhere. Like, you don't have to pay for this. It's free, so you can just do this forever. You don't have to feel weird about it. So thank you for listening to the thing, but also thank you for whatever amount of time each of you was able to kick in. That was just generous and kind, and it really has helped me get this thing kind of on its feet and working, so that is awesome of you. I also noticed that about half that many people signed up to start supporting here at the beginning of the month. So, hey, thank you, and should the time ever come when that doesn't make sense anymore, you are worthy of the same thanks that I'm extending to those who are tapping out right now. I just appreciate everybody who's participated in that in any way. It's just, I mean, you're the reason we get to do this together, so thank you a ton. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.